6 weeks before the night, I drove myself along the QEW with one hand on the wheel and a shoulder that sent white static up through my neck every time I shiftins. My stepfather slid a manila envelope across the dinner table and called it an opportunity. Not a favor, not a burden, an opportunity. My name is Quinn Ardmore, and this is the story of the night I stopped pretending. My family's love had no conditions attached to it. Before I get into it, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is there. Because this all started with a Sunday dinner in Burlington, Ontario, and if you've ever had loyalty used against you, like a weapon, wrapped in something that looked like kindness, what I'm about to share is going to feel uncomfortably close to home. 3 weeks before everything collapsed, I was sitting in the private dining room of a restaurant called the Millstone on Brant Street, watching my family perform the version of themselves they saved for good tablecloths and candlelight. There was a bottle of Niagara Peninsula Cab Franc that nobody had really wanted, but my stepfather had insisted on, and my stepbrother, Cole, was holding court near the window, describing the development project that was going to change everything for him. He called it a portfolio anchor. 62 units in Niagara-on-the-Lake, pre-construction pricing locked in, commercial strip on the ground floor, a return on paper that sounded like something you'd find taped to a bulletin board at a seminar you'd paid $400 to attend. My mother touched his arm the way she always did when Cole talked about money. Like, being close to his ambition might be something that transferred. He spotted me across the table. There she is, human spreadsheet. A few people laughed. I smiled, because I had spent 15 years perfecting that particular smile. He kept going. Said I read the fine print on grocery receipts. Said I was the only person he knew who filed her taxes in February. My stepfather laughed harder than anyone, and that laugh settled behind my sternum the way it always did, staying long after the joke had moved on. After dessert, when the server cleared the plates, my stepfather placed the envelope directly in front of me. Not beside me. In front of me, with both hands, like the entire evening had been a long runway built toward this single moment. Inside were co-signing documents for Cole's development project, 2 equipment financing agreements for machinery his numbered company had already leased, and a line of credit. Total exposure, $1.8 million CAD. My stepfather spoke gently, which somehow made everything worse. He said the lender wanted a co-signer while Cole repositioned some assets. Temporary, clean. Standard for development financing in Ontario. I worked as a senior financial risk analyst at a firm in Mississauga. I knew exactly what those documents meant. Co-signing wasn't moral support. It wasn't standing beside someone, it was liability. If Cole missed payments, my credit absorbed it. If he defaulted, his debt became mine. Registered against my name, collectible from my assets, including the condo in Burlington I had spent 7 years saving to buy. I didn't say no, not yet. I only asked if I could review everything first. The table shifted the way a room shifts when someone says the wrong thing at the wrong time. Not loudly, just a slight recalibration of energy, everyone adjusting without acknowledging they were adjusting. My mother set down her wine glass. Families don't pause when someone needs help, Quinn. Cole leaned back. You're treating this like I handed you a subpoena. My stepfather let the silence stretch before he added, there's a difference between due diligence and coldness. That was how they did it. No raised voices, no actual threats. Just the quiet, sustained suggestion that asking questions was the same as refusing to care. I sat there with the documents face up on the linen, and my coffee going cold, and something I had been circling for years finally landed with full weight. I wasn't afraid of the paperwork. I was afraid of what it would mean to finally say out loud that my family only called on me when they needed something from me. I didn't sleep that night. By 5:30 in the morning I was at my kitchen table with the folder spread open, 3 tabs running on my laptop, and a coffee going cold beside the one I'd already finished. Finding what people had tried to hide inside clean-looking documents was, literally, my job. So I started looking. Cole's income projections were too smooth. Real numbers have friction. Seasonal dips, contractor delays, carry costs, the general messiness of anything involving construction timelines in Ontario. These had none of that. I went looking for the numbered company, 2847193 Ontario Inc., and found 3 others registered to the same address on Main Street, in Stony Creek. Different names, same registered agent, the same circular financial structure looping between them. I kept going. 2 construction liens filed by a framing subcontractor out of Welland. A CRA administrative penalty from 2023 that hadn't been discharged. A private second mortgage on the Niagara, on the lake site, registered behind the chartered bank's position, not disclosed anywhere in the documents I'd been handed, and buried inside a refinancing addendum that took 3 reads to understand. A balloon payment due in 14 months that made no sense, unless someone was expecting a sudden injection of capital from somewhere. or unless someone else was going to be left holding everything when the structure gave. I sat back and watched the rain running down the window above my kitchen sink. My mother had called this an opportunity. My stepfather had called it family. Cole had called it standard. Nobody had called it what it actually was. That Monday I brought everything to a lawyer named Joel Marchetti, someone I knew from a commercial fraud file I'd consulted on 2 years earlier. Sharp, deliberate, almost impossible to read, exactly what I needed. She read the documents quietly for nearly half an hour. When she stopped, she set them down and looked at me over her reading glasses. "There's a second registered mortgage they didn't include in the package," she said. "The CRA penalty puts the numbered company in collections risk territory. The balloon payment on the Niagara property comes due in 14 months, and based on his pre-sale numbers, he doesn't have the units to cover it." She tapped the folder. "If you sign this, Quinn, they don't just own your credit rating, they own the next decade of your life." Sat in my car in the parking lot of her building on King Street East for almost 40 minutes without starting the engine. My hands were in my lap. I watched a cyclist navigate through the rain below. Cole hadn't asked me to stand beside him. He had asked me to stand underneath him while the ceiling came down. That evening, I drove out to my mother's house in Ancaster. My stepfather answered the door in his house slippers, coffee in hand, his expression already flattened before I had said a word. I laid everything out on their dining room table. The second mortgage, the CRA delinquency, the construction liens, the balloon payment, the undisclosed private lender. My mother listened without showing surprise. That was the moment I understood. "You knew," I said. My stepfather's jaw tightened. "I knew he was under pressure. You knew he was underwater, and you still tried to tie me to him. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." "It is ugly. What you put in front of me at dinner would cost me my condo, my savings, my credit for the next decade." He set his mug down very carefully. "Cole takes risks because he builds things. You just protect yourself." I had spent my entire adult life being the dependable one. The daughter who planned, who saved, who showed up without being asked and cleaned things up without requiring acknowledgement. And my stepfather had just handed that back to me like a character defect. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. 2 nights later, Cole came to my door. It was just past 9 when the knock hit the frame hard enough that I felt the vibration in the floor. I opened the door on the chain. He was standing in the hallway of my building, jacket still damp from outside. Something running underneath his expression that sat beyond ordinary anger, something that had already decided. "You went to a lawyer," he said. "I got advice. You went digging through my business. You asked me to sign for it." His eyes moved past me and landed on my kitchen table. Joel's notes, my printed documents, the folder I'd labeled simply exposure file. Something changed in his face, not surprise. Recognition. He hit the door with his shoulder. The chain pulled clean out of the frame. I stepped back. "Cole, stop." He didn't stop. What happened next comes back in pieces, even now. His hand on my arm, the wall arriving too fast. Pain cracking through my shoulder in a way that told me immediately, before anything else caught up, that something had given. My feet leaving the floor. The corner of the coffee table. A ceramic mug hitting the hardwood. My body meeting the floor in a way that communicates certain information to your body, before your mind is ready to receive it. Cole stood over me, breathing hard. One signature. That's all this has ever been. Then, I heard my mother's voice from the doorway. For one suspended second, I believed she had followed him here, to stop it, that she would see what was in front of her, and make a different choice than she had made every time before. My mother did not move toward me. She looked at Cole first. Then she looked at the documents scattered across the floor. Her face settled into something I recognized, but had never been able to name until that moment. The particular expression of someone choosing their comfort over someone else's safety, and deciding they have a reason. "You always push people to this point," she said. I tried to sit up. My shoulder sent white light up through my neck. "Mom," he broke the chain off the door. "I'm on the floor." Her eyes moved to my face, then away. "You knew how this would go if you kept pushing. There are sentences that don't arrive loudly. They just cut the last thing that was holding you in place. That was one of them." I found my phone on the floor a meter away. Screen cracked across the corner, still lit. "Don't make this worse than it already is," my stepfather said from behind her. I hadn't known he was there. I looked at my mother. I said, "I need help." She straightened. "What you need is to stop making yourself the victim every time this family asks something of you." They left. Cole went with them. The door frame sat wrong without the chain hardware, and rain from the hallway window was tracking across the threshold. I stayed on the floor until I could move. Then I used the wall, then the counter. Then my jacket off the hook by the door. I don't remember deciding to drive. I remember being in the car with my right hand on the wheel, my left arm pulled against my chest. Because raising it above my waist was not something my body would allow. And the lights of the QEW moving across the windshield in the rain, the way they do. When your eyes aren't quite tracking straight. I was going to the only person who had never once asked me to be less than I was. My Aunt Bev, my father's older sister, who had lived in the same yellow bungalow on Courtright Road in Guelph for 30 years and kept the porch light on every night because, she always said, you never know who needs to find their way. She opened the door before I reached the top step. Her face went very still and very focused. Not the panic of someone surprised, but the immediate calculation of someone already deciding what was needed. Quinn. I didn't sign, I said. The porch light blurred, and she caught me. I came to it Guelph General. White ceiling, a monitor, my right arm braced and elevated. My aunt was asleep in the chair beside the bed, still in her housecoat, one hand resting near the blanket close enough that I understood she had not left. I asked the nurse, she confirmed. Not once since the paramedics had arrived. A detective named Ferris came in the following afternoon, methodical. The kind of person who asks follow-up questions not because she missed anything, but because she wants you to hear yourself say it clearly. I told her everything, the dinner at the Millstone, the documents, the numbered companies, the second mortgage, Joelle's analysis, the photograph Cole had texted me 2 days after my lawyer appointment, taken from the street across from Joelle's office building, through a car window, time-stamped 11:14 in the morning, my building security footage, showing his truck in the visitor lot for 40 minutes before he came upstairs. Detective Ferris wrote without interrupting. When I finished, she looked up. Your mother witnessed your condition and left you on the floor. I nodded. Her jaw moved slightly. This isn't just assault. We're looking at criminal harassment, coercion, and potentially obstruction, depending on what that photograph was meant to accomplish. For the first time, what had happened to me had legal names, not a family disagreement, not me being too rigid, too sensitive, too unwilling to be flexible, not me failing some unspoken standard of loyalty. Names, defined terms, things that existed in law regardless of how my family had explained their own behavior to themselves. My building's hallway camera had captured the whole thing. The chain pulling free, Cole forcing through the door, the sounds from inside my unit, my mother arriving and stepping into frame, my stepfather in the background, and one sentence coming through the audio clearly enough to be transcribed. You knew how this would go if you kept pushing. The courtroom hearing was the kind of morning that smells like wet wool and institutional lighting. My aunt walked in beside me, Joelle Marchetti, on my other side. Prepared in the way of someone who finds courtrooms entirely unremarkable, Cole sat at the defense table looking like a man who had been inconvenienced by a misunderstanding. My mother sat in the row behind him. She did not look at me once. Cole's lawyer built the expected structure, that I had a long-standing conflict with my stepbrother, that I had engaged a lawyer as a deliberate escalation, that the night in question had been a heated family argument I had chosen to convert into a legal matter. Then the Crown introduced the evidence. The hallway footage, the hospital photographs, the financial records showing the second mortgage, the CRA delinquency, the construction liens, none of which had appeared in the co-signing package. The photograph of me entering Joelle's office, sent from Cole's own number 2 days after my appointment. The audio played. Muffled at first, then, you knew how this would go if you kept pushing. The courtroom went very quiet. Not dramatically. Just the particular stillness that settles when something undeniable enters a room, and everyone waits to see what it requires. Under cross-examination, my stepfather acknowledged he had been aware of the CRA penalty before the dinner at the Millstone. He said he had believed the situation was manageable. He said he had not considered it material to the co-signing request. The judge asked him to repeat that. He did. My mother, when asked directly, said she believed the family needed me to be more flexible about what I was willing to contribute. I looked at her across the room at that moment, and something inside me that had been clenched for years simply let go. Not because I stopped feeling anything, but because I finally stopped expecting something different from what had always been true. She had never seen my steadiness as something worth protecting, only as something available to spend. Cole received convictions on criminal assault and criminal harassment. A CRA audit and a review by the Ontario Securities Commission continued pulling at everything the numbered companies had been doing. 2 investors filed civil actions. The chartered bank froze the line of credit pending their own investigation. My stepfather's name disappeared from the 2 local business association boards he had sat on for years. My mother moved into a smaller place in Hamilton. We have not spoken since. People assume that justice feels like winning. It feels like grief. Because a conviction does not give back the years you spent making yourself small enough to fit inside a family's idea of what you should be. It doesn't undo the particular muscle memory of bracing. It doesn't stop the rain, late at night, from sounding for just a half second, exactly like it did the night you hit the floor of your own home. My shoulder required surgery. 8 weeks in a sling, then physiotherapy 3 times a week at a clinic on Waterdown Road. My aunt drove me every single time, and waited in the lobby with a crossword book and a terrible travel mug of coffee, and never once allowed it to feel like anything other than exactly where she wanted to be. Recovery, I came to understand, is not one event. It is a slow and patient renegotiation with your own nervous system. Therapy helped me name something I had never had language for. That being low maintenance, endlessly dependable, and never asking for too much were not character traits. They were strategies, ways of staying safe inside a family where warmth was conditional on usefulness. I had spent my adult life so deep inside those strategies that I had forgotten they were strategies at all. I had confused the armor with the person wearing it. A few months into my recovery, I started volunteering with a financial literacy program run through a community center in Guelph. Co-signing and personal guarantees. How numbered companies work in Ontario. The difference between a secured and unsecured creditor. What a balloon payment is and why you need to see every registered instrument on a property title before you put your name anywhere near a financing agreement. How family pressure operates. Slowly, warmly, in the language of loyalty. Right up until the moment the paperwork arrives. After a session in late November, a woman who looked to be in her late 50s stayed behind while everyone else filed out. She was holding her coat instead of wearing it, turning the lapel over and over. She said quietly, "My son-in-law has been calling what he's asking me to do a family investment for 2 years. I kept thinking I was being unreasonable for not wanting to. I had to look down at the table for a moment before I could answer her. That was the moment when what I had been through stopped being only wreckage. My aunt had been holding something for me without making anything of it. My grandmother's ring, my father's mother, had been left to me in her will, and had, over the years, quietly migrated into my mother's jewelry box, which I had not thought to question until it was gone. Aunt Bev had retrieved it through channels she declined to fully explain, and had sent it to a jeweler in the West End of Guelph to be cleaned and sized, and had said nothing about it until one evening in late October, when she set a small box beside my tea at her kitchen table. I opened it. Inside the band, in engraving so fine I had to hold the ring under the lamp to read it, were 6 words my grandmother had placed there decades before I was born. For the one who holds steady. I had to set the ring down on the table before I could speak. My aunt was very focused on her crossword. She knew something, she said without looking up, about what it actually costs to be the dependable one in a family that mistakes dependability for an unlimited resource. I read the inscription 3 more times, then I put the ring on. A few weeks later, a small group came to my aunt's back porch on a gray Saturday afternoon in November. Not many people. Joelle Marchetti, in a coat that suggested she had better places to be but had chosen this one. Detective Ferris, off-duty, in a fleece vest and trail boots, and looking like a person who spent her weekends hiking the Greenbelt. A colleague named Laura who on the worst night had sent a single text. "I have copies of your files if you need them," and had never asked for anything in return. Aunt Bev's neighbor from 2 doors down, who arrived with a serious cheese board and offered no explanation for it. Simple food, the smell of wood smoke and someone's good coffee and something with pears baking in the oven. The kind of easy, unhurried conversation that happens when nobody in the room needs anything from anyone else. Someone asked whether I regretted fighting back. I looked out at my aunt's backyard, the garden put to bed for winter, the last light turning the fence line dark blue at the edges. "No," I said. "The only thing I regret is how long I confused surviving people who hurt me with actually being loved by them." Nobody moved to fill that. They just held it. The good kind of quiet, the kind that carries respect inside it. Later, I stood at the porch railing alone for some minutes, while the others were inside. The cold had come in properly, the temperature dropping the way it does in Ontario in November when it finally means it. My shoulder ached the way it still did when the air changed. Not sharply anymore, just steadily, like a fact about myself I had made peace with. A mark that was not the same thing as damage. For the one who holds steady. I went back through the door toward the warmth and the sound of Laura saying something that made Joelle actually laugh. And I thought, this is what it feels like to be somewhere nobody needs you to be anything other than what you already are. Not the family I was born into. The one I found on the other side of finally telling the truth. Have you ever been handed paperwork disguised as love? Have you ever been told that protecting yourself was the same as betraying your family? I'd really like to hear your story in the comments. You don't have to have the ending figured out yet. You just have to know that it was never actually about the signature.